In 1990, 50% of clothes worn in the US were made here, and now that figure stands at 2%. So in a very short amount of time, we've completely offshored the entire industry. At what cost? Like, the textile industry was the biggest employer of people in rural America, and namely like women and those without diplomas. We've really lost a lot, especially in a state like Vermont, where we're largely rural and agrarian. It's just a huge missed opportunity.
That's fiber artist, hemp farmer, clothing maker, entrepreneur, and educator Laura Sullivan. This is the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. My name is Eric Herlock, and today we're going to hear my conversation with Laura. We're going to hear all about her work in Vermont and her journey along the way. We're talking fiber sheds, hemp farming, harvesting, retting, breaking, scutching, hackling, spinning, scouring, and more. This is the story of how clothing is agriculture. We're also going to talk a bit about the fashion industry and its effects on the environment and the economies of the world. There's a lot in today's show, and I hope you enjoy it. So, okay, we're going to take a quick sponsor break and then come back with a few nuggets of hemp news. This episode is made possible with support from Impactful Ventures, who encourage you to check out Farm, a platform enabling climate-minded investors to partner with leaders in regenerative agriculture who are improving the health and value of their land. Visit farmland.fi to learn more. This episode is brought to you in part by IND Hemp in Fort Benton, Montana, where they believe in the goodness of hemp. IND Hemp is a family-owned, mission-driven, and environmentally focused industrial hemp food, feed, and fiber company, providing new opportunities for farmers and rural communities. Their mission is to provide innovative agricultural products and services to connect American farmers with the pioneers and businesses that see hemp as a way to bring real and lasting change to our communities and planet. Learn more at indhemp.com. All right, welcome back. Today is March 15th, 2023, the Ides of March. I got a handful of news nuggets for you. And please bear with me. I'm working on a bit of a cold, so my voice is kind of weird, but I'm doing my best. All right, this first story comes to us from West Virginia. I read about it on lootpress.com. State lawmakers in West Virginia last week passed the Industrial Hemp Development Act, which appears to tighten the regulations around hemp products containing THC. It sets up age restrictions for things like Delta 8, Delta 10, THCO, and other hemp-derived intoxicants. The bill exempts hemp products made from the fiber. These are jackets, flip-flops, sweatshirts, a lot of clothing that has pieces of hemp stem in it, says West Virginia Delegate Moore Capito. When we were going through, Capito says, we realized that there were so many products that would fall under this very broad bill that we did, so we're exempting out of this bill, outside of the regulatory capture of this act, products which contain no THC, most of which come from the stems of these plants and again are no danger to the health, safety, and well-being of West Virginians. Yeah, good job, West Virginia. All right, speaking of tightening regulations around hemp-derived intoxicants, here's a story on Hemp Today that says, clouds darken over CBD as more states consider banning Delta 8. The story goes on to say that more state governments are joining the growing chorus that would ban synthetic hemp-derived Delta 8 THC. Nearly a third of U.S. states have explicitly outlawed Delta 8, which has intensified the struggles for a CBD industry that is already reeling. With an estimated 75% of the current supply of CBD going into production of unregulated Delta 8 products, the growing clampdown is sure to mean more attrition in the CBD sector, where demand for over-the-counter CBD oils and other products did not reach inflated expectations, and an oversupply of raw materials caused hemp biomass prices to plunge by as much as 90% over the past 3 years. This last story, I think, is a really good segue into my conversation with fiber artist and hemp farmer Laura Sullivan. I read the story on thequint.com. It's about fast fashion and its effect on the world, and it asks the question, should the fashion industry switch to sustainability to fight climate change? Yeah, it should. Anyway, there's a lot to the story, but I'm just going to read you these 5 fun facts. Number 1, fashion is responsible for 10% of the world's carbon emissions, which is more than international flights and shipping put together. By 2030, the fashion industry's greenhouse gas emissions are expected to rise by over 50%. Number 2, the 93 billion cubic meters of water used annually by the fashion industry is enough to supply 5 million people with all of their needs. Number 3, around 20% of all the wastewater in the world comes from treating and dyeing fabrics. Number 4, 87% of all the fiber that goes into making clothing is burned or dumped in landfills. And number 5, plastic microfibers, the equivalent of 50 billion plastic bottles, are dumped into the ocean annually. Microfibers cannot be removed from the water and can spread through the food chain. Delicious. All right, so just a few headlines for you here this week. I'll have these links on the show page for you at lancasterfarming.com. Check them out. And if you have any news or calendar items or anything you want me to share with the audience, get in touch with me. Send an email to podcast@lancasterfarming.com. Laura Sullivan, fiber artist and hemp farmer. Welcome to the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Eric. Happy to be here.
Good. I wonder if you could give us a brief introduction.
Sure. So my name's Laura, and I live and work in Vermont. I currently work for UVM Extension, growing hemp fiber on the research trials at the Borderview Research Farm, which is in Alburgh, Vermont. It's way up north. It's right on the border of Canada. And I came to this work in 2021 after kind of a lifelong journey of working on vegetable farms and studying art. And this is kind of like the marriage of those two passions finally made manifest for me.
So I've sort of recently discovered you and your work, and I love what you're doing, and I love your whole approach to art and fiber and hemp, textiles. And I keep coming across this phrase that you say that clothing is agriculture. So I wonder if you could just tell us what you mean by that and how the world might be different if other people saw it this way.
Yeah, so clothing is agriculture, or in other words, clothing can be agriculture. So right now, 70% of clothing is oil derived. It's made of these fabrics like polyester, which is taking carbon out of the lithosphere. And instead, what would it be if all of our clothing was soil derived and therefore also designed to return to the soil at the end of its life cycle, and therefore sinking that carbon back as well? Obviously, humans have always made clothing and used clothing. The original textiles were probably animal skins, followed by like felts and things, because the felted textile doesn't have a weave structure, so it's a more primitive textile. And then we came into spinning and weaving, and almost every culture around the world did this. So it's almost universal in that way. And those fibers were all derived from the soil. So in that sense, to me, clothing is originally agriculture and can also be agriculture again in the future.
I watched a video earlier today of you in some other kind of panel discussion, and it was like you were right at the very end and you had all of these like super important things to say about like the trajectory of, hold on, I wrote it down here. You asked the question, how would our runaway carbon emissions trajectory be different if garments were truly an agricultural commodity? So I love that idea and sort of like that thought experiment, like sort of challenging people, like what could the world be like? And, we're sitting here faced with just climate change and total, possible disaster that I think there's a lot of smart, compassionate people who are actively working to change our world. So I love that you're asking that question, but I'm curious, like what would it be like if people did think clothing was agriculture?
So a lot of the work I do outside of work is with the fiber shed movement. Are you familiar at all with that?
Well, actually, my next question was, can you explain what a fiber shed is?
Okay. So to really like get the whole scope of what a fiber shed is, everybody should get Rebecca Burgess's book called Fiber Shed. She kind of started the movement in Northern California, but it's since spread like all over the world. And in Northern New England here, we've recently like really got our act together with our fiber shed. We have our inaugural event coming up in May, but maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. So basically, a fiber shed is a commitment to work within the geography of a land base, and it's a way to belong to each other and the land. The idea is kind of pulling from like a food shed or a water shed, but where is fiber in our environment and how can we work with it? Is I guess the point of the fiber shed movement. And it's also about decentralizing global fast fashion because we have this centralized model right now that puts us on this trajectory, which if it goes unchecked, by 2050, the global fast fashion industry will use 26% of the carbon budget as outlined by the Paris Agreement. So it's basically like we can't go on this way. There's no other option.
Right.
In 1990, 50% of clothes worn in the US were made here, and now that figure stands at 2%. So
Wow.
in a very short amount of time, we've completely like offshored the entire industry. That actually happened in 1994 with NAFTA, when all non-perishable industries were moved overseas. And at what cost? Like the textile industry was the biggest employer of people in rural America, and namely like women and those without diplomas. So we've really lost that. We've really lost a lot in that, and especially in a state like Vermont, where we're largely rural and agrarian. It's just a huge missed opportunity. And doing this work now with the fiber research, it's showing that this is a viable crop here, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be pursuing it, other than that the infrastructure's not quite in place yet, which stands for like basically all of North America.
Right.
So that's like that's just the problem that I and many others have identified and are working to change.
Is there such a thing as a national fiber shed?
I think a national fiber shed can exist as like an abstract theory, but the idea about fiber shed is decentralizing and making like regionally appropriate changes, and also ones that are like mills that are based on paying a premium for the raw materials. So it's really about kind of like hyper regionalizing these industries, more than creating a national model.
Okay.
But there actually are organizations now. NALA, for one, is the North American Linen Alliance, which is a group of folks that are focused on bringing linen, which comes from flax, into North America and having that industry flourish here, which would really benefit hemp because a lot of the infrastructure can serve both flax and hemp.
Okay. If you could build that sort of regional fiber shed, develop it there in Vermont, what would it look like? How many acres of hemp would you need to be growing? How would flax fit into that? Like if you could design it, in an ideal world, what would it be like, and who would be involved?
So Vermont is obviously a lot smaller than a lot of states in the country. I think we had a speaker at our hemp conference that said the average farm in the United States is like 400 acres or something, which we really don't have anything close to that here. It would really, I think, look more like a cooperative model, with people just growing their plots on their little parcels of land, and maybe cooperatively owning a mini mill of sorts to process the fiber. We do have a number of mini mills here that process wool. And when I say a number, it's probably between like 5 and 10.
Hmm.
But even still, that legacy has survived a bit, just with people with their backyard farms with animals and things. So I think it would be, yeah, I think a cooperative model would serve us. I'm not quite sure what the acreage would look like, but we do have a farmer who's planning to grow 250 acres this coming year in 2023. So that's pretty huge for us
Yeah.
because it's quite a step up from the 2022 grow, which was 5 acres.
Oh, no,
Uh,
really?
so growth
Wow.
is happening, yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Um, and so you've been involved in, working with extension and growing hemp yourself. And then do you also process it yourself and turn it into textiles yourself? Like you have got sort of control over a whole supply chain?
Yeah, I am the processing machine. That's the thing. That's the thing we really need. Is there isn't a single like long staple bass fiber processing facility in North America. So that's really what we need. I use all antique hand equipment to do my processing, and it's not ideal by any means.
Can you describe what that stuff is?
Yeah, so basically we grow the crop, we ret the crop. I tried two retting methods this year. I did a little water retting trial and then also the dew retting or field retting. Um, and then everything gets dried and stored. And then there's basically three initial steps of processing. There's the break, which is kind of like how to describe. Maybe just Google a flax break. It's like a hand crank that kind of, I guess, just breaks the fiber. So the flax fibers flex and the hurd breaks
Hmm.
apart and starts accumulating underneath.
Okay.
Um, then you scotch the fiber, which is basically you're hitting it with like you're kind of beating it with like a dull sword or wooden knife, and that's just removing more herd material and other debris. And then you hackle it, which is kind of like a torture device looking thing. It's basically a bunch of nails, probably rusty 100-year-old nails, on a piece of wood, like a comb, and you just draw the fiber through that several times and comb it out. So at that point, you have your long fibers extracted, and then you move on to spinning them,
Okay. And then once
which I also do.
you do that, oh, well, explain the spinning process too. Let's just take us through the whole process.
Okay. So spinning bass fibers involves this extra tool called a distaff, which um, so what I really love about all of the legacies of the textile world are, I guess what I really love about like all of the fiber arts is there's just this kind of like, I don't know if this happens to everybody or just me, but there's kind of this like cellular memory piece of it, whether it's like spinning or weaving or dressing the distaff. They're just these acts that are like so repetitive that it um it's like your body just remembers it and you get into this rhythm and it feels really amazing. And if I do it when I'm quiet, as in like not listening to anything, whether it's a podcast or music, I feel like I just download all this like wisdom about how I'm supposed to be doing it better. I don't know. But so there's this step where you dress the distaff. It's this whole thing. You kind of like tie the fiber around your waist and swirl it onto the stick and then tie it up, but not so tight that it can't be pulled apart again. And then you can, if you're really good, you can do one hand and you just kind of draw it off the distaff into the spinning wheel. You wet your fingers a little bit because most bass fibers are wet spun, which is another difference than wool. And yeah, you just try to avoid um, like big clumps of fiber going through there. It's all just a practice,
Yeah.
like anything
Like a
else.
meditative practice.
Yeah, I think I've gotten a lot better at it this year.
Yeah.
Um, and
Um, okay, that's a real
then there's
quick
a
question.
step called scouring. Yeah,
Scouring.
go for it.
Well, just when you're talking about like receiving that sort of ancient wisdom, do you feel like that's like an inherited memory, or just through the act of doing it, you're just sort of receiving it on some cosmic level?
I think it's a combination of things. Like my ancestry is Irish and Italian, and from what I have read, there are hemp and linen legacies in both those cultures. When a bunch of my maternal great aunts emigrated from Italy, like they were all seamstresses. Um, the first time this actually happened to me was when I was like 9 or 10, and like knitting entered my consciousness, and it was so urgent for me to learn how to do that because I had really been into drawing. I was always drawing clothes, making little magazines and catalogs, and so I found out about knitting, and I rushed to my mom, and I was like, "Do you know how to do this?" And she's like, "Yeah." And I was almost like betrayed. I was like, "You knew how to do this and you didn't tell me." So I made her teach me like right away. She taught me on barbecue skewers because it was that urgent. We didn't have any knitting needles. Um, it didn't work at all. Like we bought knitting needles after that, but it was just this extreme need to do something with my hands, and as a child, like that was just so powerful because kids have like so little control in their lives and so little ability to affect change. But for me to like make something that came from my head and bring it forth into like this realm was just so powerful. Um, and I think that's kind of like what sparked it all for me. I don't really knit anymore,
Okay.
but it definitely got me here.
Yeah, you've been on this journey a long time.
hmm
All right, so getting back, you were scuttling. Was that the word you were about to? You were, the
Oh,
wet
scouring.
scouring. Okay, there you go.
So scouring is a word a lot of people in the industry call it degumming. I think they're kind of similar, but it's just a washing process. It's like you use a neutral pH soap and you basically strip the fiber completely. So in the in the handicraft, like the textile world, the typical time you would do that is after you have the spun yarn. But a lot of people in industry do it with the raw fiber. So I'm not sure why.
Hmm.
But yeah, then so after spinning, there's scouring. Then you want to smooth it out again while it's still wet. And at that point you have your yarn ready to weave or knit with.
Okay. So I realize you've been on this journey a long time, but how did you learn how to use all of these sort of like ancient technologies, and how did?
Yeah. Um So yeah, after I learned knitting when I was 9, my mom signed me up for sewing summer camp, which was so embarrassed by. I thought that was like mortifying, but I actually ended up really loving it. So so at that point, I knew how to sew, and it was kind of something that I could do, but I wasn't really pursuing it. I didn't really give myself permission to be an artist for a long time in my life. I went to college right out of high school, which at the time I was just not excited about. I was like a little bit younger than everybody, and I just like wasn't quite ready. But I was planning on studying anthropology, because material culture is something I've always been interested in, and I'd argue it's the thing I'm still interested in. But I wasn't giving myself permission to be the artist, just the observer at that point. So I left school after a year. I went home, I worked a bunch. I went to go live with my cousin out west. ended up going back to school in Colorado this time, where I was finally had the confidence to pursue art. So there I learned weaving in a class. And then in my thesis, my senior year was when I really started exploring with like the natural fiber and natural dyes. And that was super cool because I think one thing I learned whenever I teach like natural dyeing or basket making or anything really to do with these natural materials, it's like um it really opens people up to a world that was like right beneath their feet all along. Um, and that's a really cool feeling, like when you're dyeing with onion skins and people see the color for the first time. It's just like it's magic. It really is.
Yeah.
You got to take it when you get it. Um, so that was kind of like a self-exploration, but within the framework of school where I learned weaving and spinning and dyeing and and I had worked on vegetable farms too, so I knew a bit about farming growing up as well. And I don't remember when I really learned. I mean, the break is really self-explanatory. It's like there's one movement. You just move a lever up and down
Yeah.
basically. And probably YouTube videos here and there, but they're really self-explanatory. The body just remembers mnemonics.
Yeah. So how or when were you then introduced to hemp? Like in school, you were studying, all like the crafts of weaving and all that. Was hemp an option for you, or when did you get there?
Yeah, so I stumbled upon hemp during my thesis as well. I think I was probably just researching other natural fibers, and it kind of hit me like right in the face, just like the same kind of almost betrayal feeling. Like, you mean to tell me that the world's longest and strongest fiber has been like under prohibition for the past 100 years, and so I bought some fabric to use in my thesis. And yeah, I think at first my professors were a bit discouraged because they thought I was just doing like the classic like stoner art stuff, like printing weed leaves on fabric via cyanotype in photography class, which I did. But actually, when it came to be time for my thesis, I ended up winning an award for the class. And that really helped like build my confidence around what I was doing because there were numerous times in that year where my professors were telling me one thing and I had to decide to either listen or do or listen to my own instinct and to do that and ultimately win them over was pretty powerful. And they were really great. They provided the framework for me to say like, no, I'm gonna do it my way. Sorry.
Yeah.
But
That
it
takes
was
courage. It takes a lot of
yeah.
courage to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a very formative time. And then I left school when I graduated and ended up woofing in Europe for a little, and then I interned with a felt artist in the Netherlands, which was more kind of natural material and natural dye studies. And I came back home to work on a farm, and at that point was like, I really want to pursue growing hemp, and figure out how to bring these two passions together. So that was like in 2017, I moved to Vermont and started working on a few CBD farms and ultimately ended up in the on the fiber research trials.
Mhm. So what is it about hemp fiber as a material to work with? Like, how is it different? How is it superior? Or what other challenges does it have?
I guess the major challenge is the barriers um, to mechanizing the process as it exists here. So that's something I think a lot of people are working on now. You're seeing a lot more hemp processing facilities showing up, which is awesome and fantastic. And yet fine textiles are still probably going to be the last step in the hemp industry as we see it. There's quite a bit more low-hanging fruit, just in terms of, hempcrete, hurd building materials, wood chips, like
Bedding
all the
material.
really,
Yeah.
yeah, paper, the really accessible uses for hemp. But creating fine textiles requires a lot of finesse, and a lot of other areas, a lot of other countries have had a leg up because either they didn't banish hemp the way we did in 1937, or just yeah, their culture allowed for them to continue developing that technology. So right now, hemp fiber really exists in China and Eastern Europe. To get at answering your question a little bit more, it is pretty similar to flax. It's a bit stronger, and in that sense, it can be harder on machinery or your arms. But the thing that about hemp is you kind of have to grow for the end use up front. So I'm specifically really interested in textiles. I think we've established that. So on our trials, like I'm doing things from the get to produce textile grade fiber, which namely is the seeding rate. You're going to grow really densely so that the plants are growing tall without a bunch of branches, competing for sunlight, creating a really thick stand. And then another factor that matters a lot is your harvest timing. So for fine textile quality fiber, we're thinking like we harvest at peak flowering, which if you're in it for grain, like your grain hasn't even set yet. Um, so you have to make these decisions ahead of time for your fiber. And then also in that sense, like the first year I started this job in 2021, I kind of thought like, oh, we just want to grow like the biggest plants. And that's not what you want. For textiles, you want like a pencil or chopstick diameter stem. And because of that, the plants will be smaller. They're maybe like a meter and a half, and they're kind of mimicking more like flax in that sense. And I think also in Europe where people are growing hemp for textiles, like the crop is usually cut at a meter anyway to just create uniformity because machines like consistency and uniformity. So it's not a matter of just growing like the biggest plant you possibly can.
Right. Can you talk about certain varieties that you'd like? And also, what is that planting density?
Yeah, I think our goal is like 400 live plants per meter squared. And I get confused because sometimes I'm looking at the measurement in like kilograms per hectare or pounds per acre.
Right.
But basically, we want like a million plants per acre. I think mine was even like 1.7 million this year, which was a little too much. Um, so, but it's I'll
Yeah.
know for this year.
All
It's
right.
the type of thing where you only get one shot in the whole year to figure it out, um, which makes it fun.
Right.
And what was your other question?
Varieties. What sort of varieties
Oh,
are you enjoying right now?
yeah. So we had some really good genetics in our trials this year. But one thing I've noticed, and I think others have noticed this too, is variety sometimes doesn't matter as much as like how it's handled post processing. So like for example, I had one variety that I water redded and dew redded, and the resulting fiber were two completely different colors.
Oh wow.
The water redding trials tend to be like that really like platinum, like toe head color. And the dew redding has a bit more of a spectrum. But I'm really smitten with like the yellow stem varieties, which is a trait that's typical of some fiber varieties. So one we had this year was it's called Fibror 79.
Okay.
And then another one that did really well, and it was also in our grain trial, was Futura 83. And that one, it was like the highest yield of grain and I think the highest yield of fiber in the two separate trials.
Okay.
So that one. that one was great.
Cool. Are you growing these on your home farm or at the university?
So these are grown at the research farm in Alburgh, the Borderview Research Farm.
Okay. Um,
I live in a bus, so unfortunately I don't have a farm
right.
at the moment.
Okay. Cool. Could you describe for me a piece of art or a garment that you made that, just something from the course of your career that you're just super proud of?
Hmm. Um, that's a really hard question because it's kind of like asking which child is your favorite. They all have stories. So I think stories are super important to this work making a difference. I think like an argument's not going to change someone's mind, but a story really can. And creating these place-based textiles is all about telling a good story and getting people on board with that. So that's a little bit of a tangent, but there have been there have been so many that just were they're all like a part of my story. So it's hard to like there was my whole thesis which I mentioned, which was really important to me. I made a wedding dress for a friend in 2020, which stands out because it was made from like her repurposed like fairly family heirloom wedding dress. I've made a skirt from like a deer hide that was purchased as a waste product from a butcher. There was also hemp in that. And that one I just loved. Um, so yeah, I don't know if I can answer that
Okay.
question.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you are all of these different things. You're a fiber artist, you're a farmer, you're an entrepreneur, right? And you're an educator. That's a lot. You've got a lot happening up there.
Yeah, when you put it that way.
Um, so tell me a little bit about your work with the extension program at UVM.
Sure. So, my boss, her name is Dr. Heather Darby. She's like a I think a world-renowned agronomist, and she's very smart, and it's just an honor to work under her. At the farm, we have trials in many different crops, whether it's corn, soy, hemp. We do fiber, grain, and CBD at the moment. Dry beans. Sometimes we have some vegetable trials. And our work is all about like developing best practices and then um, disseminating those out to the farmers in the area so that they can adopt those practices or not.
Mm-hmm.
And what's cool about research farming is we have the money to explore things that other farmers don't. Like another farmer can't really take the risk of growing a huge fiber crop and then not having it bought at the end of the year.
Right.
So we're allowed to take those risks and draw those conclusions. And we host a lot of events where that information gets out to our farmers.
Cool. You said that like hemp in the state is kind of growing in interest. You said there was 5 acres last year, but there's going to be more than that this year, hopefully. Talk about what that like hemp industry looks like there in Vermont and farmer interest and the questions you get. And I don't know, are there more farmers coming in now?
Yeah, sure. So around 2017, there was a big interest in CBD, and a lot of people jumped on that. And I think a lot of them did it with the intention of switching to recreational when that happened, which it just happened this year or last year in October. Um, but you can understand they're doing that so that they have that infrastructure in place for
Sure.
when that's coming. And CBD kind of happened in like a boom and bust sort of way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and from what I can tell, based on like the attendance at our field days and our conferences and stuff, is that a lot of people are interested in getting into grain and fiber. So the interest is strong, and I mean, you probably know that from all the folks you're talking to. Like, there's this really unique moment happening where a lot of people are wanting to get involved, and that's super exciting. And we do have one processing facility in the works um, here in Vermont, and hopefully they'll be up and running soon. So that will hopefully draw a lot more people on board.
Right, right,
But yeah, I think there's a lot of interest, but also a lot of questions. And again, no one wants to be the first one to take that
right,
huge risk.
right,
So it's hopefully it's happening at a more healthy pace,
right. A
that
manageable
it's
pace. Yeah.
right, not just gonna come through and explode and leave.
Right. I was surprised by the CBD thing because I was covering the industry. And once the Farm Bill came through in 2018, I was like, great, now we're going to make all of our things out of hemp. And I was kind of wrong, right? They just started growing CBD, which is great. I love CBD. I love all the cannabinoids. But from where I'm sitting, like the real like paradigm shifting potential is on the fiber and the grain side.
Yeah, and I'm really interested in how farmers can work it in with crop rotations. And I think another thing, like for people who think like, oh, it's not going to happen, like you have to remember we're in a moment of climate breakdown right now, and the world's going to have to adapt. And when people think of Vermont, they probably think of dairy, and dairy's not really working out so great. And these are my opinions. I don't represent the university or your show or anything. But before dairy, it was sheep. So landscapes change, and this is a working landscape. And I really see a possibility for hemp to fill some of the voids in our industry right now.
Yeah, for sure. Can you describe a vision of the future where agriculture and manufacturing are working together in harmony with nature?
So I think we just need to ask ourselves the hard questions of, like, this is kind of just reframing your question, but how can we interface with the landscape in a way that leaves it better than when we found it, like more diversified, regenerated, um, yeah, not being conscious of where wastewater is going. Um, And I think that there's a tie between like the health of the people and the health of the soil and the health of a culture. Um, and all those things are intertwined. And it's in our best interest to do these things. It's not losing anything other than capitalism. So I think, yeah, I would say circular design up front. You need to be conscious of everything that you consume and what it does after. And in that way you can think of it like I want to see I sometimes I wonder about like a lot of people farm with plastic, and that's necessary at this point in time. But what if there was a plastic like that not only um dissolved at the end of the season, but amended the soil at the end of the season? Like, how do we think like that? I don't think it's that far-fetched. I think it's just something we haven't spent enough time with yet.
Right. And there's people out there who are thinking about these things, but it's like we haven't gotten to that like critical mass yet. Or how do we reach like the people and get them to actually care? It's like, I try not to be cynical, but sometimes I get cynical. That's just like the Generation X in me. But it's like I see people, they're just like distracted by technology or pop culture or by their own like financial problems. And they're not concerned about, carbon in the atmosphere or sea level rise. Like from your perspective, how do we reach them? And what you said earlier about, a story can change people. Like how do we reframe the story, or what story should we be telling?
Yeah, I think that's where artists and designers come into play. Like I think that's where our moment is to shine. Um, People are consuming 60% more clothing than they did in the year 2000 and keeping them half as long. And I think that this whole uh single use and like disposability is a trend. Like it hasn't existed that long. I think before the 50s there weren't like single use plastics and things. So that is a learned behavior, which means we can also unlearn that behavior. Um, and I think it's gonna take artists and designers who are just developing um these really cool products that are, yeah, circular in the way they work. Like you can buy I don't know, paper with wildflower seeds mixed into it. So it's like you write a note and then you can plant it in your garden. And like that's such a cool world. I want to live in that world. I don't want to live in this hellscape.
I used to work for Organic Gardening Magazine, and our business cards were those wildflower seed business cards.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Um, so, what else would you like people to know about the work you're doing? Or, where can people find you? That sort of thing. These are like wrapping up questions because I know you're busy and you've got
Yeah.
things to do.
Um, I would encourage people to locate their local fiber shed. Chances are, if you live in the United States, there's one in your area already. And if this is something like you want to be adjacent to, get involved. Even if you don't think like your skills translate, it's like our fiber shed could really use someone who knows how to like make websites in 2 minutes. Um, so like chances are you could be helpful and just get involved and maybe find a community out of it. And if you wanted to support our fiber shed, you can go to nnefibershed.com, I think. Um, and again, we have an event coming up on May 20th. It's our inaugural roundtable event.
Cool.
Um, and yeah, we're really looking forward to that. What was your other question? Anything else I want people to know?
Yeah. What else should people know about the work you're doing or the work that needs to be done here in the world?
I think if everybody could find something that makes them feel purposeful, um, that's step one. And that's something that only you can do for yourself. And I think that's a much better goal than happiness, because happiness, like by its nature, is fugitive, but purpose will get you out of bed in the morning any day. And if you want to follow me, you can at hempfiber.artistfarmer on Instagram.
Excellent. Laura Sullivan, fiber artist, hemp farmer, and philosopher. Thank you so much for joining me here today. It's great to talk to you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
So there's the quote you can put on a t-shirt. Happiness is fugitive, but purpose will get you out of bed any day. All right, my thanks to Laura Sullivan for spending some time with me this week. Thank you all for listening to our show. My name is Eric Herlock. I'm the digital editor at Lancaster Farming Newspaper, the greatest agricultural newspaper in the world. Check us out online at lancasterfarming.com and be sure to go to the show page for this episode to get those news links and also links to Laura's work. All right, that does it for me. Until next time, I'll see you in the newspaper. Season 3, Episode 8 of the Industrial Hemp Podcast is copyright 2023 by Lancaster Farming Newspaper, part of the Steinman Communications family. Today's show is written and recorded, edited, and produced by me, Eric Harlock, and the music you hear throughout the show is courtesy of Tin Bird Shadow. And just a note on the tune you heard in the opening. That's a Shetland fiddle tune called "The Slocket Light," written by Tom Anderson, and it's being played there on the baritone ukulele because my fiddle playing is still pretty squeaky.